Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Paikin. Welcome to the 2022 Ontario Election Leaders Debate.
Good evening. I'm Althea Raj. Steve and I will be your moderators tonight. The parties and the television consortium that organized tonight's event agreed to the format and the rules. And the speaking order has been decided by a draw.
Just before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this studio is located on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit.
And with that, let's introduce the leaders according to their parties standing in the last Legislative Assembly.
Tonight, we welcome Ontario Progressive Conservative Party Leader Doug Ford, Ontario New Democratic Party Leader Andrea Horvath, Ontario Liberal Party Leader Stephen Del Duca, and Green Party of Ontario Leader Mike Schreiner.
And we're going to begin tonight with a 1-minute opening statement. Mr. Ford, please start us off.
Well, good evening. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and thank you for joining us. Friends, I'm excited about the future of Ontario, but it's up to each of us to roll up our sleeves and get it done. We're the only party with a plan to cut through the excuses. We're the only party saying yes. We're saying yes to rebuilding our economy with better jobs and bigger paychecks. Yes to building highways and key infrastructure like 413 and the Bradford bypass. We're saying yes to keeping costs down and putting more money back into your pockets. We've already scrapped the license fees, and we scrapped the tolls, and we're cutting the gas tax. We're saying yes for working for workers by getting more people in the skilled trades and manufacturing. And we're saying yes to keeping our economy and our province open today and for the future. Friends, let's say yes, let's get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm sure this is not the most fun thing you'll ever do on a Monday night, but because you're joining us, it shows that that you care and that this election has a lot at stake. So my message to you tonight is a pretty simple one. There's hope. There's hope that together we can fix the things that matter most to you. We can make sure our healthcare system is there when you need it, and that we clear the backlogs and get people's wait lists down. We can fix long-term care, get the care back in and the profits out. We can make sure everybody has a decent job, a job that actually pays the bills, and we can make sure that the affordability of housing and all of the other essentials are taken care of. We have a chance to do that this time around, and regardless of the last couple of governments, I know that together we can certainly make it happen. Take care of what matters to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Horvath. Mr. Schreiner.
Althea and Steve, thank you for moderating tonight, and thank all of you for joining us. It is now or never to address the climate crisis. And that's why we need to stop Mr. Ford from paving over our future. We need affordable homes, not expensive highways that will primarily benefit a few wealthy land speculators and make life more expensive for the rest of us. We need to stop the license plate gimmicks supported by the NDP and Liberals that will drain billions from healthcare, education, and housing. We need new solutions to old problems so we can build a caring, connected, affordable, climate-ready Ontario, the kind of Ontario that protects the people and places we love in this province. We can act now to build the future you want. And that's what Ontario Green MPPs are ready to provide the leadership at Queen's Park.
Thank you, Mr. Schreiner. Mr. Del Duca.
Well, thanks very much. Good evening, Ontario. Thank you so much for tuning in. The past 4 years have been really, really tough. And while I know Ontarians are strong and resilient, so many are still suffering in this province. You think about students forced to learn through screens, being isolated from their friends, seniors who are so concerned about ending up in for-profit long-term care, and the cost of everything going up for virtually everybody. Let's face it, the Ford Conservatives have walked away from their responsibility to lead and left you to fend for yourselves. And that's not good enough. Right now, they want to build a $10 billion highway, the 413. It's going to make a few of their donors wealthier. It's not going to do anything for you. Tonight, I'm going to focus on the Ontario Liberal plan to make your life more affordable if you're buying meals, taking public transit, or paying your rent. We're going to protect our seniors at all costs. We're going to bring back an optional grade 13, and we're going to repair our schools. There's a choice in this election. Let's make our province truly a place to grow.
Thank you, Mr. Del Duca.
Just before we dive into questions, a quick word about format here. There are 4 main subject areas for debate tonight. The leaders will each have the chance to state their positions on the question, and then we're going to have one-on-one debate, followed by an open debate among the 4 of you. Now, Althea and I have been asked to enforce the rules, which means, leaders, you've got to stick to the allotted time that you've been given, and you can't all yell at each other all at the same time. They will cut the mics in the control room if you do that. That's the one complaint I hear from people more often than anything else. There are people timing each of you in the control room, so we will do our best to make sure that everybody gets equal time.
The leaders were asked not to bring cheat sheets, props, or briefing books so that this could be an unscripted conversation. Again, the speaking order was determined by a random draw, and the first theme tonight is the economy.
Every poll, leaders in this campaign says that affordability is the top concern of voters. So let's start with something simple. What would you do to make life more affordable for Ontarians? Ms. Horvath, you got the first 45 on this.
Thanks, Steve. It's certainly an issue that I keep hearing about no matter where I go in Ontario. People are very worried about what the future holds. Young people are giving up hope that they'll ever buy their own home. Renters are worried about the cost of rents going up. Everyday folks in this province should be able to afford everyday life. And so our plan does a lot of things to help with that. Not only make sure that we address rent controls in this province and make sure people can afford to buy their own homes, but also relieve some of the expenditures that people now are paying out of their pocket. We'll also be making sure we have a $20 minimum wage in this province, getting gas prices into a place where people can afford them by getting
Ms.
the.
Horvath, thank you.
Okay, I'm
Lots
sorry.
of time to pick up on this in a moment. Stephen Del Duca, you're next.
This is such an important point. You know, every single Saturday morning, I go out to the local grocery store and buy the groceries for my household. So the prices that you see going up in your day-to-day lives, that's something that everyone across this province experiences. Earlier today, standing with members of the new Ontario Liberal team, I signed the Affordability Pledge that we put forward. 19 specific ideas that will save you real money and make your life easier and more affordable. For example, buck a ride province-wide, $1 transit fares right across this province for municipal and for provincial transit systems. We're going to take 8% off prepared meals under $20, and we're going to give our most vulnerable seniors a $1,000 top-up on their old age security pension while we bring back rent control. These are just some of the ideas in our plan.
Very good. Mr. Ford, you're up next.
Well, thank you so much. You know, the economy means absolutely everything in this election. Folks, you're going to have a clear choice. You're going to vote for parties, all 3 of them, that want to hike your taxes, bring back the license plate stickers, and increase the gas tax. All 3 of them want to do that. I'm cutting the gas tax. I'm getting rid of the license plate stickers, and we're getting rid of the Del Duca wind tolls that they put on. We're going to make sure our economy thrives. Under the previous government, we had lost 300,000 jobs. We have gained 550,000 jobs with 338,000 in the waiting. We brought back the auto sector. We're going to be the capital of electric vehicles anywhere in North America.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ford. That's time right now. We'll have more time, obviously, to get into this. Mr. Schreiner, you're 45, please.
Yeah, affordability is the #1 concern people talk to me about, especially housing affordability, which has gotten so much worse under the current government. A whole generation of young people are wondering if they'll ever be able to afford to buy a home. That's why the Ontario Greens Masterclass Housing Affordability Strategy is about getting speculation out of the marketplace so first-time home buyers have a level playing field. You know what, Mr. Ford, if you want to make transportation affordable for people, let's get big oil out of people's pockets. You can save $2,000 a year driving an electric vehicle. So let's make it affordable for the average person to own them. And when it comes to food prices, why would we pave over the farmland that feeds us? Let's grow food locally and let's make it affordable for people at the grocery stores.
Thanks, Mr. Schreiner. The format now calls for direct one-on-one debate between 2 of you, and then we'll do the same thing again with another 2 of you in a moment. Stephen Del Duca and Doug Ford are in this first round. Mr. Del Duca, what do you think of his plan?
Well, first of all, I heard Mr. Ford speak just a moment ago. Again, it sounds like he's reading the script from 4 years ago, trying to fight the 2018 election all over again. Ontarians face new challenges in part because he's walked away from his responsibility to lead, and new challenges, of course, because of COVID. We are in the midst of an affordability crisis, which is exactly the opposite of what Mr. Ford and his team said they would solve 4 years ago. That's why earlier today, I signed the 19-point Affordability Pledge for you. It's going to bring down the cost of transit. It's going to bring back rent control. We're going to boost the minimum wage and build in a real living wage. We're going to help seniors. We're going to do all of this and more in our fully costed and forward-looking plan. It's a plan you can count on. That's why I was proud to sign the pledge earlier today. This has to be more than just about empty words and slogans that you hear repeatedly coming from Mr. Ford and his team. People are hurting right now in this province, and Mr. Ford wants to act like he can skate right past that.
Okay,
like COVID never happened and the affordability crisis
Let's
doesn't
give him
exist.
a chance to respond. Mr. Ford.
Well, Mr. Del Duca, I just want to remind you, under yourself and the former Premier Kathleen Wynne, you destroyed this province. The economy was going downhill quicker than the Canadian bobsled team. It just continued going down. 300,000 jobs left this province. That's 300,000 people couldn't pay their rent, couldn't pay their mortgage, couldn't put food on the table because of your terrible policies. You want to bring back the license plate stickers, as you did, and you raised it every single time. You want to increase the tolls like you did before on the 412 and 18. You actually, it was your tolls. So,
OntarioLiberal.ca.
And we're going to cut, Mr. Del Duca, we're going to cut the gas tax. You're all in favor of hiking the gas tax. You're in favor of the carbon tax. We aren't.
Oh, my goodness.
We're the only the only party that's going to cut taxes, put more money back into your pockets. We're creating an economy that is thriving right now with 550,000 jobs and 338,000 in the waiting.
All right, Mr. Duca, a word,
look,
please.
you know, there's an old saying in life: you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts, Mr. Ford. And the truth of the matter is, you need to stop reading the script that looks like it came out of the fiction section. The people of Ontario are fed up with your slogans and your empty words. They want real action. People watching at home, you can go to OntarioLiberal.ca. You can see the 19-point Affordability Pledge. We're going to slash the cost of public transit. We're going to make it easier for you to buy meals. We're going to make it easier for you to pay your rent. We're going to boost the minimum wage. This is a positive plan to make sure going forward you have what you need.
Last word,
not
Mr.
more
Ford,
empty words from Doug Ford and his team.
You said you want to do a buck a ride for the fares. 2 years ago, you were on the podium and you were saying it's dangerous to lower fares.
So why don't
do you know
support
why you're
my
saying
plan?
it's dangerous? Because
Why don't you
didn't
support
build
my plan?
any subways whatsoever.
We opened
We're
the subway
building
in
subways,
Vaughan.
the largest
Okay,
infrastructure.
friends, jumping in, that's our time for this
Total
round.
fiction.
That's
Total
our time.
fiction.
That's our time for this one-on-one. More to come, of course. We'll have another one-on-one now between Mike Schreiner and Andrea Horvath. And Mr. Schreiner, I think you get to go first. Take it away. What do you think of the NDP's plan?
Well, first of all, one of the affordability concerns that doesn't get talked about enough in this province is how the affordability crisis is affecting the most vulnerable. You know, Mr. Ford's license sticker gimmick disproportionately benefits households who can afford to own lots of cars. Doesn't do anything for a family that can't afford a car, a kind of family that might be on Ontario Disability Support Payments or Ontario Works, which Mr. Ford has frozen their rates. The Ontario Greens put forward a clear plan to double ODSP rates and Ontario Works so we don't force people to live in legislative poverty. And I'm happy that Ms. Horvath listened to the fact that we were fighting for the most vulnerable in this province and amended the NDP plan. I encourage these other two leaders to do the same because nobody, when we're in a cost of living crisis in this province, should be forced to live in legislated poverty.
Right.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Mike. And the best way to make sure that doesn't happen is by making sure that Mr. Ford doesn't get another term in office, because we've seen his record. There's no doubt that things were bad before Mr. Ford took office, but it's been 4 years and life's gotten harder for folks. It continues to get harder and harder. People are worried that their kids are going to have to move really far distances if they're ever going to be able to own their own home. But in most cases, we're seeing kids staying at home even longer in their parents' houses. And now that's not good for young people, and it sure isn't good for their parents, is what they tell me. So the cost of housing, getting rent control back into Ontario, Ontario, getting the big oil companies under control by outlawing the gouging at the pumps, which we know is about to happen because there's a long weekend coming up. There's a lot of things we can do to relieve the pressure,
Okay, Mr. Schreiner,
but we
you wanna
have
come
to
back
make
on that?
sure that Mr. Ford is not re-elected first.
When I knock on doors in this province, I don't care where I go in this province, housing affordability is the #1 issue people talk about. A whole generation are wondering if they'll ever be able to own a home. So many people not being able to afford their rent. That's why I'm so proud the Ontario Greens put forward what some have described as a masterclass plan in delivering the housing solutions we need in Ontario. Driving out rampant speculation because homes should be for people, not speculators. Building more supply without paving over the farmland that feeds us.
I want to give Ms. Horvath a chance to comment on some of
And
these
I'm
things as well.
happy that Ms. Horvath has amended her platform 3 times now to keep up with us on housing.
Ms. Horvath.
Well, again, the very most important thing is to get a chance to actually relieve the pressure on people and families. And so there's no doubt that Mr. Ford's cuts are only going to hurt more. We need to elect a government that's going to take care of the affordability of life here.
Okay, thank you, you too. Althea.
That wraps up the first one-on-one segment. So I'll next ask a question. You'll have 45 seconds each to answer, and then we'll open it up to open debate. The cost of building the proposed Highway 413 running through the Peel, York, and Halton regions is pegged at $10 billion. Is building a new highway the best way to spend $10 billion? And Mr. Schreiner, you can begin.
Absolutely no. The $10 billion for the Highway 413 is fiscally irresponsible. It's a climate disaster. It will pave over 2,000 acres of farmland. Mr. Ford, do you understand the food and farming sector contributes $50 billion to Ontario's economy and over 800,000 jobs? Why would you put those jobs and that prosperity at risk to save commuters 30 seconds? We need affordable homes, not long, soul-crushing, expensive commutes. We should not be forcing families to drive until they qualify for a mortgage. Let's build livable, affordable, connected communities where people can live, work, and play close to home and close to the people they love.
Thank you very much. Mr. Del Duca.
So first of all, I said this in my opening remarks this evening. Highway 413 makes no sense whatsoever. It's $10 billion of your money. Your money, my money, Ontario's money that's going to be spent recklessly if Doug Ford and his team have their way. It's not going to help you at all. It's actually going to make some of his richest political donors even richer. I'm the only person on this stage tonight whose community is directly impacted because this proposed highway will run through parts of my hometown of Vaughan. I'm also the person who several years ago, when I was serving as Minister of Transportation at that time, saw that this was a mistake, a colossal mistake that you don't need. I stopped it the first time. Doug Ford and his team brought it back for the wrong reason. If I'm elected premier in a few weeks, I will stop it once and for all and invest that money in building new schools and repairing schools everywhere.
Thank you very much, Mr. Del Duca. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks very much. For some time now, the NDP has been clearly stating our opposition to the 413 and the Bradford bypass, and we're going to stick with that position. We're not going to flip-flop, as Mr. Del Duca has done, because the 413 is the wrong thing to do. It paves over farmland, it paves over the Greenbelt, it takes chunks out of the Holland Marsh, and what we don't need is more massive highways to mansions that nobody can afford. We need to make sure housing is available, starter housing particularly in communities across our province. And my question to Mr. Ford is, why are your developer buddies more important than making sure people can have homes that they can actually afford in their communities?
Thank you very much, Ms. Horvath. Mr. Ford.
Well, the question is, it's costing us tens of billions of dollars a year being stuck in traffic. And the people in Vaughan, in Caledon, in Brampton, they want the 413. Matter of fact, Mr. Del Duca, it was one of your candidates that went out there and they're promoting the 413. So I'm not too sure if you're agreeing with your candidate when they said the 413 or not.
Check with the council.
Folks, we have 2.5 million people coming to this province over the next few years. We need places for them, number one, to live. We need transportation to get from one point of the province to another, making sure goods are flowing. but you're going to save a half an hour each way. That's an hour that you get to spend with your family. We are going to build the 413, the Bradford bypass, and many other highways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. And now we'll kick it off for open debate. And perhaps this would be a good time to talk about housing affordability as well. Mr. Del Duca, you get the first word.
Sure, fantastic. Thanks so much. So a couple of things. One is I'm not sure respectfully where Ms. Horvath got the issue regarding flip-flopping. I've been very clear on this since my time as Minister of Transportation all the way through. Here's an interesting thing Mr. Ford likes to ignore. Most of the municipal councils in the affected communities have now changed their position on his reckless highway. I'll also point out that the independent panel that I struck to review that highway many years ago actually reported, as Mr. Schreiner said earlier, that only a small handful of commuters would save literally seconds. Here's what an Ontario Liberal government will do with your money, those $10 billion. We're going to build 200 new schools across this province and repair 4,500 others. We're going to make sure that windows in your kids' classroom can open and close.
Del Duca,
we're going to make sure that the air that your kids breathe, my kids and your kids breathe, the air that your kids and my kids,
Mr. Del Duca,
respectfully, if I could just finish my sentence,
the school backlog of repairs was $15.8 billion.
We're going to build 200 new schools and 4,500 schools that will be repaired. And I'll also just point out, as has been said by others so far, that we have a plan to slash transit fares down to $1. That's going to take an estimated 400,000 cars off our roads, a much better investment for you at home than Doug Ford's reckless Highway 413.
So
okay,
I'd
thank
like
you.
To talk a little bit about rent controls. I think that was your question, was it not? About rent controls?
Housing affordability.
Housing affordability. Well, so here we are in 2022, and rent controls came off under the Harris government. And then, of course, unfortunately and disappointingly, 15 years in office, and the Liberals didn't choose to bring them back.
We did.
And now we see what's happening. We have a situation where renters are getting increases of like 30 and 40%. How can anybody be expected to come up with that kind of money? So yes, rent controls will come back under an NDP government. They should have never been taken off, nor should it have been a status quo with the Liberal government. But there's more to it than that. There are everyday expenses that people need to be able to afford, and people need a wage that you can pay the bills on. Mr. Ford took $6,000 out of minimum wage workers' pockets, and now he has Bill 124, a low-wage policy that not only affects workers in the public sector, but now it's spreading into the private sector. And people are on strike for good wages because Mr. Ford's buddies figured out that he's setting a stage for a low-wage economy. And so we have LIUNA on strike. We have carpenters on strike. We have drywallers on
strike. Let Mr. Ford come in because he wanted to address your point.
Economy, Mr. Ford.
You know something, I appreciate your comments, but they're totally inaccurate. We're the only government. We had more housing starts than we've ever seen in 30 years. We've had more rental starts than we've ever seen in 30 years. You know, Ms. Horvath and Mr. Del Duca and Mr. Schreiner, I'm the only one that wants to build.
Story.
There isn't any building or any building development that you aren't against.
The question is, who do you want to build for?
Absolutely,
you don't want to build for hardworking families in
this
the province. You want to line the pockets of your political donors.
You want to talk about the hardworking men and women that build?
Let him finish.
You know, Ms. Horvath, for years, the union supported you. Well, guess what? The Boilermakers don't support you. LIUNA doesn't support you anymore, and the electrical workers don't support you. You've lost touch. You're out of touch with the hardworking men and women.
I think you need to look in the mirror, Mr. Ford.
When the trade unions are supporting us for the first time, they know we're going to get it done, and we're going to spend money on infrastructure. That's why they're supporting us. They don't believe in you any longer.
In it for his
I think I need a little time here.
What it's all
Mr.
about.
Ford says he wants to build. His own budget predicts that housing starts this year will actually be 13,000 homes less than last year.
Exactly.
What he wants to build is he wants to build a fiscally and environmentally reckless highway. Not only is this highway 413 and Bradford bypass bad enough, but then he rerouted the highway just to be able to support a few additional land speculators who are going to get even wealthier off of this highway, putting it through a more even reckless environmentally path. The Bradford bypass. When a golf course donor said, hey, we don't want it through our golf course, he rerouted it around them. He will roll out the red carpets for the Amazons of the world and the big box stores of the world. But when it comes to supporting local farmers, he'll pave over their farmland, hurting our economy. When it comes to protecting us from flooding and the climate change, he'll pave over the wetlands that clean our drinking water and protect us.
Mr. Schreiner, if it was up to you and up to the three of you, you wouldn't build nothing. You would rather protest.
I'd build transit. I'd build housing.
I'd get the roads built.
I'd build public infrastructure. I'd build schools.
I just want to be clear.
I'd build hospitals.
I just want to be clear. I want to be clear about something here this evening. 4 years ago, Doug Ford stood on a stage like this one. He looked into the camera and he said to the people of Ontario, if elected premier, he would make it cheaper and easier for you to buy a home. And since that point in time, the cost of a house in Ontario has climbed by nearly $500,000. The Ontario Liberal plan will build 1.5 million new homes, all forms of housing, right across this province over 10 years. We will bring back real rent control in this province to help renters. We're going to make sure that surplus provincial land gets unlocked, and everything that we sell on those lands will go to first-time home buyers who Doug Ford has abandoned for 4 straight years.
Mr. Del Duca, you say you want to make it affordable. You want to hike up the toll roads, which you did. You want to hike up the gas taxes. You're 100% with the carbon tax, which will be another 10 cents,
Ford,
which is a major issue. And you want to bring back the license plate stickers.
Thank you very much. We're going to cut it off there. Thank you very much. Nobody can understand you when you're all talking at the same time. We're going to change topics. Healthcare. As you know, health is the largest chunk of the Ontario provincial budget. Yet, patients continue to endure very long wait times. There are calls for more doctors, for more nurses, for more hospitals. How will you meet these needs? And are you opposed to the expansion of for-profit private healthcare delivery? Again, you have 45 seconds, and Mr. Del Duca will begin with you.
Well, I suspect, like most Ontarians, I was shocked back in February when Doug Ford's hand-picked health minister said that his government would actually relieve the surgical and diagnostic backlog, which is at an epic level right now, by inviting the private sector, private hospitals. Those were the words that she used to come in and help clear the surgical backlog. An Ontario Liberal government will focus on building up public health care. We'll clear the surgical and diagnostic backlog within 2 years by investing $1 billion in new money to make sure that our operating rooms are running 24/7 and on weekends and evenings, that MRIs and CT scans are also boosted. We're going to bring 100,000 new healthcare workers online within 6 years, and we're going to do it within the public system by scrapping Bill 124 and truly valuing our frontline healthcare workers.
Thank you very much. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks, Althea. You know, the backlogs in surgeries are really hurting people. I met a woman not too long ago who has a knee surgery. She has to have both her knees done, and she's on a long wait list. And she's at the point she can't even go up and down her stairs anymore. And now she's looking to see whether she can afford to buy a new home in this housing market. We do need to clear those surgical backlogs, but we know that our hospitals were on their knees prior to even Mr. Ford taking office. But then he started cutting in healthcare the minute he got elected, and then we had COVID. But privatization is not the answer. And New Democrats have always stood against privatization, notwithstanding that both Liberals and Conservatives brought privatization to home care and long-term care. We'll take it out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schreiner.
The key to expanding healthcare capacity in this province and addressing the real wait times that people are experiencing is to invest in people. Nursing vacancies have doubled over the last 2 years. We're now short about 30,000 nurses. And when they're overworked, underpaid, and disrespected by their government through wage freezes, it's hard to recruit and retain nurses. So let's end the wage freezes that are wage cuts. Let's actually invest in ensuring that we have publicly funded, publicly delivered health care. Let's put people before profits when it comes to long-term care. And let's ensure that mental health is health by funding the mental health system we need through OHIP.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ford.
Well, when we came into office, our healthcare system was broken. You know, it was on the brink. It was already stretched to the max. And we inherited hallway healthcare, very, very clear, and everyone knows it. Our hospitals were crumbling for decades from a lack of investment. Even your Minister of Health said you starved the healthcare system. You stopped talking to the doctors. You know, we have a great relationship with the doctors and right across all healthcare workers. But we're investing back into healthcare with record numbers. We're investing over $40 billion in new hospitals, 50 projects right across every single region. We're hiring 8,000. We've already hired 8,600
Mr. Ford,
healthcare
I'm sorry,
workers.
I'm going to have to cut you off, but you can continue talking about your record in the face-to-face. First, though, we'll go to Ms. Horvath and Mr. Del Duca. Ms. Horvath, you can kick us off.
Thanks so much. There's no doubt that our healthcare system is in a shambles, but it is that way because of years of squeezing hospitals by the Liberal government, and people deserved better than that. The hospitals were on their knees when COVID hit. The Liberal government gave us hallway medicine, but of course, Doug Ford's cuts just hurt more. They make things worse and not better. That's why we need to invest in our hospitals. We need to scrap Bill 124, make sure that we're respecting those healthcare workers who we call heroes and then we treat like dirt, Mr. Ford. So we need to do that. We also need to get internationally accredited nurses and doctors on the front lines on our healthcare system. I met a doctor not too long ago. She lives in Buffalo. She lives in Fort Erie, and she's accredited from somewhere else, from another part of the world. And in Ontario, in Fort Erie, she cannot practice as a doctor every day. She crosses the border to Buffalo and works as a doctor. So we need to fix a broken system that's been broken for a very long time, get people return and recruit and retain healthcare workers, treat them with respect, get rid of Bill 124, scrap Doug Ford's low-wage policy, and really start providing the kind of services that people need. With more funding, 24/7, we can clear the backlog of procedures.
So, look, there's no doubt about the fact that there is a really, really brutal backlog that we have both in surgeries and diagnostics in this province right now. When I said in my opening remarks tonight, people are still struggling. That's why it's so important that there's a forward-looking and fully costed plan that will address those needs. This is not an abstract talking point for me. You know, a couple of years ago, respectfully, Ms. Horvath, a couple of years ago, my mom fell and broke her hip. And I have to tell you, though she got good care at the local hospital in York Region, it was so tough for our family and for her to navigate that system. It's only gotten worse over the past couple of years, talking about the surgical and diagnostic backlog. That's why the Ontario Liberal plan will invest $1 billion over 2 years so that we have MRIs and CT scans that are running full tilt, so that we have operating rooms that are operating on weekends, evenings, all the way through to clear that backlog. Because right now, if you need prostate surgery in this province, only 30% are able to get it on time. That's not good enough in a province like ours. We have to repeal Bill 124
for all kinds of procedures.
Again, Ms. Horvath, respectfully, we're not here tonight to fight the 2018 election all over again.
You'd love to leave all that stuff in the rear view.
There are new challenges facing
you left a wreck behind you, and you have to step up and take some responsibility for that, Mr. Del Duca.
There are new challenges facing the people.
Where were you when all these decisions were being made? Were you out getting a coffee at the cabinet table?
Respectfully, there are new challenges facing Ontario because of how the Ford Conservatives walked away from their responsibility. I would rather that we would find a creative way to repeal Bill 124 to make sure internationally educated nurses and doctors are brought online.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
We're going to give Mr. Ford and Mr. Schreiner a chance to debate now. Mr. Ford, you may begin.
Well, as we're building the healthcare system and hiring thousands of doctors and nurses and PSWs, Mr. Del Duca, propped it up by the NDP and Ms. Horvath, you fired 1,600 nurses.
Why is
we're hiring thousands.
Mr. Del Duca.
Why is it private education and private health care with you all the time?
I know the truth really hurts, but you fired 1,600 nurses. Every region of this province is getting a new hospital. There's 50 new projects happening right across this province. Yep. We're also paying for the nurses' tuition fees and for their books if they serve in underserved areas. We're taking care of them. We made sure the nurses got a $5,000 retention pay, which is, on the average, 7.6% increase. We've given the PSWs $3 permanent increase. And that far exceeds what your government did, Mr. Del Duca, propped up by the NDP.
You want
We're
private
building,
healthcare.
we are actually building the healthcare system that we need for the future and hiring more nurses. We have 720 doctors coming online. That takes care of 750,000 patients. We're building a med school out in Brampton. We haven't seen a med school in decades, but we're building a med school to make sure that we get more doctors into the hospitals.
Forgetting about the Northern Ontario
Mr. Del
School of
Duca, you
Medicine.
had your chance. Let's bring in Mr. Schreiner.
Mr. Ford, have you talked to a nurse lately? Have you talked to a nurse about how disrespected they feel, how overworked and underpaid and underappreciated they are, how insulted they feel being called heroes and then essentially having their wages cut by having them frozen? Mr. Ford, if you want to build capacity in our healthcare system, you have to make sure you invest in the people who deliver that care. And nurses are the backbone. They deserve to have Bill 124 gone. They deserve to have the opportunity to negotiate fair wages and fair benefits. You know, even their mental health care benefits were frozen because their entire benefit package was frozen. Have you looked somebody in the eye who lost a loved one in long-term care and explained to them that $171 million of money drained out of our long-term care system into the private pockets of shareholders at a time when people were scrambling for PPE, when seniors were trying to get access to vaccines, when PSWs were desperate to have a little bit of support to care for people and save their lives? We are better than this as a province. We can put people and care before profits. That's what it means to have a publicly funded, publicly delivered, public healthcare system. Care, people first.
Do you want to have 5 seconds
Well,
left
I
to
have 5
respond?
seconds to respond. I don't know where you're getting your figures. We're building new hospitals. They want to work in a clean environment. There's hospitals that were 80 years old that were crumbling. They want to work in a clean environment, and we're building the hospitals
You need
to make
people
sure they're
to work
taken
in
care
those
of.
hospitals.
Thank you
Mr.
very
Ford.
much. Thanks
Nurses,
to all of
doctors,
you
and others to work in the hospital.
Thank you.
Leaders, let's continue on the theme of healthcare here. And I want to ask you what the most important lesson you learned was as it relates to healthcare during the pandemic, which would improve things going forward now that you have that knowledge. We have brief opening statements and then four-way debate. Mr. Ford, you get the first kick at this.
Well, I'm going to answer your question straight up. That was the most challenging time of my entire life as Premier. And I don't wish that on any Premier or any administration in the future, as we inherited an absolute broken system in long-term care from multiple governments. It was a challenge. Did we get everything right? No, we didn't get everything right. But I'll tell you, every decision I made was with the best intention, with the best medical advice I could get at the time. But we're going to fix the system. We're fixing it right now until no other Premier, no other administration has to go through what we had to go through. You know, there were challenging times, but I'll tell you, I'll make sure that never happens again, ever.
Thanks, Mr. Ford. Mr. Schreiner.
We need to make sure that we're adequately prepared for the next crisis, whether that crisis is a pandemic, whether it's the climate emergency, whether it's some unknown crisis that's bearing down on us. And that means investing in people, making sure our care providers are adequately and fairly compensated. It's making sure that the most vulnerable are protected. You know, one of the reasons so many doctors say that we should be writing prescriptions for people, for them to access housing or food, is because the most vulnerable who don't have access to housing or food actually put the most pressure on our healthcare system and bore a disproportionate burden during the pandemic. We need to invest in them.
Thanks, Mr. Schreiner. Mr. Del Duca, you're up.
I think the most important lesson that every leader should have learned during COVID, in particular in healthcare, is that you have to follow the science. You do have to listen to the medical evidence, especially when you're dealing with a public health crisis. Now, everybody watching at home knows that in February 2021, when the science table told the Ford Conservatives don't reopen so rapidly and they ignored it, that made subsequent waves of COVID dramatically worse for Ontario families. And then when he scrambled, he decided he wanted to close playgrounds and give police more powers for carding that bore no relation whatsoever to the challenge that we faced. Yes, we need to get to the bottom of why this province wasn't prepared for sure, but the way to go forward in a responsible and thoughtful way when you're dealing with healthcare crises is to listen to the science and follow it
Thanks,
in a
Mr.
thoughtful
Del Duca.
way.
Andrea Horvath, your time.
Thanks. Whenever I think about what happened during the pandemic, I think about long-term care and the absolute tragedies that took place there. I think about people like Kathy Parks, who was traumatized by the death of her father in a private long-term care home, a for-profit long-term care home, who basically refused to give him the care that he needed. Lots of families watched as loved ones, as the armed forces showed us when they arrived, dying in long-term care homes of malnutrition and dehydration. Our seniors should have never gone through that, nor should our government have had put a law forward so they couldn't sue and get justice to protect their buddies in private long-term care.
Thanks, Ms.
A lot
Horvath.
more to say about this.
Okay, we have 5 minutes now of open debate. Mike Schreiner, you get the first kick at it.
I want to talk about the fact that we need new solutions to old problems when it comes to our healthcare system. We need to invest in people, investing in the people who provide care, but also investing in the people who need that care. The biggest driver of stress on our healthcare system is actually poverty. It costs our province $33 billion a year. There are literally doctors and nurses saying we should be writing prescriptions to address poverty if we want to take pressure off of our healthcare system. Let's talk about housing. University Health Network says we should be writing prescriptions for housing because one of the biggest drivers of people going to hospital is they don't have safe or affordable housing. So let's talk about ways that we can prevent illness and promote health by investing in
Let's do that.
Yeah, sure.
1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
So as I was saying earlier, look, when you go through the kind of public health crisis that we have, in addition to listening to the science, you need to know that, as has been mentioned earlier, mixing the private sector and care, in particular elder care, is wrong. But we also see that with Doug Ford and his team and how they want to clear the surgical backlog. Our Ontario Liberal plan will invest $1 billion over 2 years to clear that backlog. We're going to bring on 100,000 new healthcare workers. We're going to repeal Bill 124 so nurses and personal support workers get the support and the compensation that they deserve to have. We'll continue to invest in physical buildings, including expanding community health centers, building 15 new CHCs right across the province of Ontario.
Ms. Horvath,
but
you
it really
okay with
does
all
boil
that?
down to public
You okay
versus
with all
private.
that, with this checklist?
Doug Ford, who prioritizes private all the time.
Here's what I think that we should be thinking about when it comes to our healthcare system. We saw what happened with COVID-19. We should have learned a long time ago that you can't squeeze hospitals. You can't fire 1,600 nurses like the Liberals had done. If I was in charge during the COVID-19 pandemic, I would have made sure people had paid sick days to prevent the virus from spreading. I would have taken care of the kids in schools, made the classrooms smaller to avoid the spread of back into community. I would have made sure that an iron ring was put around seniors in long-term care. How shameful that there was no protection for seniors in long-term care. And instead, this government protected their buddies by preventing them from being sued.
Let me get Mr. Ford to comment on that. Hang on. We should let him. You've made an allegation. We should let him respond to that. Mr. Ford.
I'll tell you, one of the biggest challenges when it first started was the PPE. Mr. Del Duca, you left the cupboards empty. I'll never forget it. Them calling me up and saying we have 5 days of PPE because the Liberals didn't restock it. And right away, I gave a shout out to industries, and within 2 days, 26,000 companies came online on our portal. And now we'll never rely on any other jurisdiction, any other country in the world for PPE. 3M is manufacturing millions and millions of N95 masks. We have surgical masks, we have gowns, we have face shields.
Okay.
We have everything that will never have to be in that position
Quick comment here. Hang on.
Stephen
Del Duca first. Stephen Del Duca.
There was a criticism there. Look, there's no doubt in my mind the people of Ontario have an exceptional capacity to rise to the occasion of a challenge. But I want to understand better. I think people at home do as well. Why, when the science table told you in February 2021 to not reopen so rapidly, why did you choose to do so? And then why did you tell little kids like my own daughters that they couldn't go to playgrounds and that police should have more power to trample on charter rights indiscriminately? Why was that your solution in the midst of that moment of crisis? Why? Why then?
Mr. Del Duca, as I said earlier on, folks, Was everything perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. But if there was an issue, I'll get up there. I made the change. I apologize. But
playgrounds
let's
and police.
just talk about that
Playgrounds
for a minute,
and police.
Mr. Del Duca. For 2.5 years, literally 24/7, I was working on this pandemic. It's easy to sit back from the sidelines when you didn't have to make the tough decisions that I had to make and criticize. You have the easiest job if you just sit there and criticize.
Mr. Ford, respectfully, Mr. Ford, respectfully, this is the job that you signed up for 4 years ago. You asked for people to support you 4 years ago. You ran to be premier. You must accept responsibility.
Very good. You've both made your points. You've both made your points.
At the core of the
Can I please have we need the last 25 seconds. Mr. Del Duca, Mr. Del Duca, please. Can I please? Excuse me. Can we please save 20 seconds for Andrea Horvath to respond?
So I did want to say that one of the things we have to acknowledge is that there's still a lot of people suffering from COVID in terms of mental health challenges, people that lost their businesses. Mr. Ford got the calls from Walmart and they did well, but small businesses lost a lot. People lost loved ones. We have to take care of folks' mental health in this province, and then we have a plan to do exactly that.
That's healthcare.
With mental health through your OHIP card, not
That's
your credit
healthcare.
card.
Now we got to talk education. The province's 2 million elementary and secondary students have been through an unprecedented last 2 years. I don't have to tell any of you. Can we get opening statements from the four of you on what you would do to improve education in Ontario? Opening statements, then we'll get into more debate. Mike Schreiner, you get to go first here.
We need stability and more investment in public education. I mean, our students have been through 2 tough years with the pandemic. But I want to remind everyone it's actually been 3 years of instability, because a year prior to the pandemic, thank goodness, students and educators fought back against Mr. Ford's efforts to increase class sizes and bring on mandatory learning. If the last 2 years have ever taught us anything, it's we need lower class sizes and no mandatory online learning. So let's make the investments to lower class sizes. Let's make the investments to ensure that our students learn in classroom. And let's make the investments to deal with the repair backlog. Mr. Ford wants to build a highway. Greens want to fix schools.
That's time. Doug Ford, your chance is next.
Well, the purpose of our education system to make sure we prepare the kids for the jobs when they get out of school, jobs of the future. And we change the curriculum to make sure that we focus on financial literacy until kids can understand how to create a budget, how to look at a mortgage. You know, we need real life and job skills when they get out until they have the upper hand. They have the best jobs and the best ability to go out there and fill those jobs. We're short 338,000 jobs right now because we've created the environment for the economy to be thriving right now. But we want to make sure that the kids understand the opportunities out there. And again, no matter if it's coding, mathematics, engineering,
Okay, Mr.
that's
Ford,
what we're focusing.
More time to discuss in a moment. Mr. Del Duca, your time.
There is perhaps no other place where Mr. Ford's record has been more appalling than in publicly funded education. This is not spin. This is not some sort of script that he's reading that someone else wrote for him. This hits my household directly because my daughters attend publicly funded schools in our home community. The Ontario Liberal plan will bring back an optional grade 13. We're going to shrink class sizes to 20 for elementary and secondary, hiring 10,000 new teachers to make that happen. We are going to cancel Highway 413, as we said, from day one. We're going to invest that in repairing and building new schools. 5,000 new special education professionals to help every child, yours and mine, be set up for success. Doug Ford does not value publicly funded education. Ontario Liberals do.
Thanks, Mr. Del Duca. Andrea Horvath.
Thanks very much, Steve. You know, the pandemic certainly was hard on kids and schools. I agree with what Mr. Schreiner has said. But let's face it, there were cuts to education before the pandemic hit. Mr. Ford was firing 10,000 teachers to the point it was so awful that kids were actually protesting outside of their own schools. There were 20,000 kids on the lawns of Queen's Park to try to save their public education system from this premier. And kids deserve so much better than that. What we've seen, of course, since COVID is a doubling down on the lack of commitment to public education. Kids are in classrooms with mittens on and coats in the wintertime. There's a repair backlog. We have to address all of those things and make sure
Thanks,
our class
Ms. Horvath.
sizes are smaller.
Thank you very much. Now we do one-on-one. This is Stephen Del Duca and Mike Schreiner's turn. So, gentlemen, over to you. You get the first word.
So as I was saying just a moment ago, when I think about what's taken place in my own household over the past 2 years, as my daughters, who are in grade 9 and grade 5, have struggled, like kids right across this province, forced to learn through screens. By the way, as was pointed out a second ago, Mr. Ford wants to continue with mandatory online learning. Ontario Liberals will get rid of that. They were isolated from their friends. Their teachers, their frontline education workers were not supported. And as has been pointed out, this unraveling and undermining by the Ford Conservatives of public education started shortly after taking office. And why? Why? Because time and time and time again, the Conservatives, including this version, under Doug Ford, want to emphasize private over public. Think about this for a moment. When schools like the school that my daughters attend were looking for rapid tests during COVID, we learned, as many public schools struggled to get those tests, that thousands of private schools were getting them with help from this government. That tells you all you need to know. Whether it's private hospitals or private schools, the Ford Conservatives cannot help themselves.
Let's hear from Mike Schreiner.
They want to privatize and put you and your families at risk.
Mr. Del Duca, let's hear from Mike Schreiner.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to put you and your families at risk. And the question is, what did we learn from COVID? And I'm going to ask Mr. Del Duca what he's learned from when the last Liberal government was in power. The repair backlog got worse. Matter of fact, it got billions of dollars worse. 227 schools were closed, mostly in rural communities. In many of those communities, the school was like the lifeblood of the community, especially in those single school communities. Teachers' bargaining rights were taken away. They took the government to court and won. And so I'm wondering, Mr. Del Duca, have you learned from what the last Liberal government did to public education in Ontario? In the same way we need to learn, in the same way we need, give me a second, please. In the same way we need to learn from the pandemic, I believe the Liberals need to learn from the lack of investment they made in public education the last time they were in power.
Mr. Del Duca.
Very proud to respond to this particular question again, because this one hits home for me. Again, I'm not talking in an abstract way. This is not a key message for me or a script written by someone else. This is literally about Talia and Grace, my daughters, and the 2 million kids who attend publicly funded schools across Ontario. I think Mr. Schreiner and we share a lot in common on public education. Can I just say, in 2018, when Liberals left office, there were actually more public schools in the province of Ontario than there were in 2003 when Liberals first came to office. Regardless, because I'm not here to fight the 2018 election over again, because kids like mine face new challenges in this province, that's why Ontario Liberals will cap class sizes, bring back the optional grade 13, and repair schools by canceling
15
Highway
seconds for Mike Schreiner, please.
Yeah, the Ontario Greens will invest in public education. We will make the investments needed so your children thrive in public schools.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. We have our second one-on-one now, and it's Doug Ford against Andrea Horvath, or with Andrea Horvath, if you prefer. Mr. Ford, you get the first word.
Well, we're going to invest in jobs of the future, as I said. There's nothing more than a parent wants than their kids to graduate, get a good paying jobs, and thriving sectors right across this province that they never had under the Liberals and NDP. The Liberals and NDP closed 600 schools. That's 600 schools were closed across the province.
Just making it up.
We're building 100 new schools. We're investing over $14 billion in creating an environment for kids to go into brand new schools with the greatest technology and the HVAC systems. That's what we're focusing on. We're getting our kids ready for jobs of the future, no matter if it's in the tech sector or the auto sector, that we're going to need a lot of jobs in the auto sector.
Let's hear what Ms. Horvath has to say about that.
Thanks so much, Steve. One of the things that Mr. Ford refuses to acknowledge is the is the cuts and the chaos that he brought to our public education system. That's why we saw kids protesting at Queen's Park and outside of their schools. And now after COVID, we know that parents want quality, well-funded public education, not online learning that Mr. Ford can then privatize. We have parents who have told me stories, people have told me stories, that their kids have actually lost their spark, that their personalities have changed. So we need to get our class sizes smaller. We need more teachers. We need more supports in our schools to help those kids to get back to where they should be. We should be investing in public education because kids deserve to be able to find their gifts and excel and go on to build a great life in this province. Yes, there's one thing I agree with Mr. Ford. SHOP needs to be back in our schools, but it needs to be back in our public school system, not privatized just so that your buddies can make some money off of it.
Mr. Ford?
Well, we've invested. I'm glad we're agreeing on skilled trades, even though any of the trade unions don't support Ms. Horvath because they don't believe in her. They don't believe in the Liberals. But we're investing $1 billion into the skilled trades. And we're starting in high school. It's absolutely critical that we get the kids involved at a very early age. And on the funding side, we're hiring 3,000 new teachers this year alone. We're increasing spending by $600 million, and we're up 9%.
This is their time.
And we're up
This is their time.
9% from when the Liberals were in power. But you know, folks, what I'm keyed on, making sure they have real life job skills when they get out of school, that they can find a good job, that they can find an affordable home,
and
live here and thrive.
What you're missing is the way that they get exactly that. The way that they get exactly that is by having teachers in the classroom and the one-on-one support that they need and the mental health supports that they need to come through, to recover, I guess I'm saying, from what happened during COVID. But your cuts and your chaos destabilized our education system significantly. And ask any parent and they'll tell you the same thing. You can't cut to a better education system. You just can't.
Okay, thank you very much. That's the end of this segment. Althea.
Still on education. In some parts of the province, violence in schools is on the rise, with students bringing in weapons. Education workers also report an alarming number of violent incidents directed at them. Sure. What will you do to improve school safety? And we'll begin with Ms. Horvath.
It's a really important question. I've been hearing a lot of heartbreaking stories around both of those pieces, violence in the schools and violence towards education workers. And we're not going to be able to fix what's broken in our schools with more cutbacks. We have to make the investments. We have to provide the supports. We have to make sure kids are able to get their needs met. I mean, we have a province that I don't know how somebody does this, but this government promised they were going to help kids with autism and then pulled the rug out from under those families and doubled the wait list. We need resources in our schools. We need supports for our kids, and that will help us to ensure that our classrooms are safe and that they're safe workplaces also for education workers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Del Duca.
It's a really serious problem. The classrooms that I visited, the classrooms that I hear about, the classrooms that my daughters attend, it's not like a generation ago when I was growing up. So we need to make the right kind of investments. So, for example, in the most recent Conservative budget, when Doug Ford chose to cut $1.3 billion at this stage out of public education, that was a reckless mistake. The Ontario Liberal plan will hire up 5,000 new special education professionals. That's more than one for every school in this province. 1,000 new mental health professionals to help target at-risk youth in our publicly funded schools. And we will cap class sizes at 20 in both elementary and secondary to give teachers the support and the space that they need to do their job.
Thank you very much, Mr. Del Duca. Mr. Ford.
Well, we're going to work with the whole community. That's where you go right down to the root cause. Work within the community, work within the schools. Give these kids support that they haven't had. And Mr. Del Duca, you mentioned about mental health. Our government has spent more on mental health in schools than any other time in Ontario's history. We increased spending by 420%. That's a massive amount. We're investing $3.8 billion into mental health. But we're going to be there to support the kids. We're going to be there to support the families. To make sure they don't have these challenges in schools. We're going to make sure we invest the proper amount of money to help the schools and the families and the communities.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Schreiner.
Yeah, I just don't see how cutting $1.3 billion from the education budget invests the kind of money we need to invest in schools. I've heard from so many teachers, and I've also heard from so many desperate parents whose children need support. That's why we need to increase funding for educational assistants and those who work with children with special needs. And I want to say to Mr. Ford, when it comes to mental health, 28,000 young kids on a mental health wait list in Ontario right now. Average wait time is 18 months. Sometimes it's as long as 2.5 years. I met a young person the other day who was on suicide watch and had to wait a year to get help. Ontario Greens will make a commitment to reduce those wait times to 30 days.
Thank you very much. We now move on to open debate. And Ms. Horvath, you can kick things off.
Thanks. And this is something, of course, that we've also committed to, because it shouldn't be the case that young people can't get the mental health supports that they need. But that has been a long-time problem in our province. I met a young person in Paris, Ontario, in the riding of Brant just last week. And he told me a heartbreaking story of being bullied at school. And he didn't get the help that he needed. And he didn't get it as he was a teenager. And he didn't get into young adulthood. And 2 years ago, he attempted death by suicide. It was a heartbreaking story, and he talked to me about it because he wanted to be the voice of so many other people that are having that kind of mental health pain, and we need to address it. We need to make sure that we realize that mental health pain is just as serious as physical health pain, which is why we have a plan to get mental health services covered through your OHIP card, as I mentioned earlier. But cuts to education, my question to Mr. Ford is, who cuts education during a global pandemic? Apparently, Mr. Ford thinks that that's okay to do. And I think the rest of us disagree.
Let's give a chance to Mr. Ford to respond, and then the others.
Well, I'll just cut to the numbers, folks. Go online and look at our budget, and you can read our budget. That we're actually you'll find that they're misleading you. And you're going to find the facts are that we're spending 9% more, a $26 billion budget. We're actually investing $14 billion into new schools, building 100 new schools. But we're geared on making sure that we're preparing the kids for jobs of the future, no matter if it's the tech sector, as I said, or the automotive sector, or every single sector out there is hiring. Because we've created the environment for the economy to thrive and prosper and grow. And when the economy thrives, prospers, and grows, so do communities. We're building new schools all over this province, folks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. Let's bring in Mr. Duca.
Our kids out there to have the upper hand when they apply for jobs.
I said just a moment ago that classrooms today are an awful lot different from what they were like when I was younger, and I know from what Mr. Ford was younger. But when I listened to him talk tonight, and I listened to him talk about education over the past 4 years, it begs the question whether or not he's actually spoken to a teacher or a student or a parent outside of photo ops in schools.
Actually, I have.
Because if you have, you will hear about anxiety, mental health challenges, that feeling of abandonment, because you have cut, because you have undermined. But let me just also talk about post-secondary, the other part of education where there are serious mental health challenges too. When Mr. Ford came to office, he made it dramatically less accessible and far less affordable for young students to go to college or university in this province. Horribly backward economic policy. And yet he's here tonight bragging like he deserves a medal or a pat on the back about supporting public education. Your record on public education, Mr. Ford, is an embarrassment, and you should be ashamed of yourself for what you have done to kids across this province, like mine and the hundreds of thousands of others that just want a premier who understands that you have a moral obligation to get public health care right, and you, sir, have failed this province.
Mr. Ford, would you like to respond? And then we'll give Mr. Schreiner a chance.
Well, I'd love to respond. You know, I'm proud of our record on education. Matter of fact, I think we have the best Minister of Education we've ever had. He's invested billions of dollars to make sure he's getting the kids ready for jobs of the future. Under your administration, they didn't have to worry about jobs because you ran every single job out of the province.
Back to the
300,000 jobs left under your watch. You want to talk about embarrassment?
Yeah,
you destroyed this province in every area, no matter if it's economy, hospitals, long-term care. You destroyed this province by the NDP.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schreiner, please come in.
If Mr. Ford's going to talk about the jobs of the future, then why is he so actively hostile about the jobs of the future? The bottom line is climate action is job action. Over the next decade, 65 million jobs will be created globally in the new climate economy, worth $26 trillion. Is Ontario going to lead that? Are we going to create those jobs? Or is Mr. Ford going to continue to be active hostile to them? For example, renewable energy. He canceled all the contracts. That's where most of the energy investment is going globally. Ontario can lead. When it comes to retrofitting our homes, he canceled all the programs to help people save money by saving energy, that we could ramp up jobs for people in the trades and building construction sectors. When it comes to supporting local food, he wants to pave over the farmland that's actually going to grow that local food. Let's invest in the jobs of tomorrow. The Ontario Greens have made a commitment. Free tuition for 60,000 young people to be trained up and receive apprenticeships in the fastest growing markets of the new climate economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schreiner. Let's give the last word to Ms. Horvath.
I'm glad that that we're talking. You brought it back to education and started talking about what we need to do there. Under this government, we've had the only university that had to close its doors because he didn't want to fund them. That's a pretty shameful thing. We know that this government doesn't support public education. They don't support our post-secondary education system, and we have kids that are having debt the size of mortgages from their education. We can fix that.
Okay, thank you very much for this segment. We're moving on to the theme of leadership. In Ontario, across Canada and elsewhere, politics is becoming more divisive and confrontational. Hate crimes are rising. What should be done to address this? Why are you the leader to foster unity rather than division? Mr. Ford, we'll begin with you.
Well, I think in the past couple of years, if it's taught us anything, is leadership matters. And, you know, during the pandemic, I had to work with 444 mayors and wardens that we got along very well. I had to work with 12 other premiers and a federal government of all different political stripes. But we all worked together. No matter if it was a pandemic or building the largest subway system anywhere in the country, or actually building electric arc furnaces in the Sault Ste. Marie and Hamilton in your own backyard that both of you voted against. That's like taking 1 million cars off the road. But we worked with the federal government. We worked with them to create a thriving auto sector in all different areas, no matter if it was Windsor or Oshawa or Oakville.
Mr. Ford, I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're out of time.
Okay.
Mr. Schreiner, your turn.
We absolutely have to address the rising levels of hate in our society and the rising levels of toxic hyperpartisanship in our politics. And that takes strong leadership. It takes leadership that's willing to work across party stripes to get it done. And I believe that's the kind of leadership that I've brought to Queen's Park and that Greens have brought to provinces across this country, whether it's in British Columbia or PEI. I helped lead the first bill in Ontario history that all 4 parties supported. And I am going to work hard in this next parliament to ensure that we can get all 4 parties behind the Our London Family Act to combat Islamophobia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schreiner. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks very much. I agree on the Our London Family Act. I was really honored to work with the National Council of Canadian Muslims after that horrifying terrorist attack that happened in London. I don't know why the current government or why Mr. Ford's government decided not to support that legislation, but we need to take seriously the rising hate, the Islamophobia, the anti-Semitism, the anti-Black racism. We see too much hate in this province. That's why we pushed the last government to put in place the Anti-Racism Directorate. We're going to have a minister responsible for anti-racism, and we're going to do the work necessary to reduce the hate, reduce the toxicity, and try to give people a good life here in this province.
Thank you very much. Mr. Del Duca.
Well, thanks so much. One of the most important responsibilities that a premier has in our province is to work hard to unify all regions, all peoples, and frankly, even all political parties. During this pandemic, I tried my best to lead by example. I reached out to all 3 of the other party leaders on paid sick leave, on the vaccine certificates and mandates, and on dealing with what we saw in terms of the Omicron variant and how it was impacting our hospitals. I will say, Ms. Horvath and Mr. Schreiner and their teams participated every time Doug Ford and his team were invited to actually be collaborative with us, they chose not to. An Ontario Liberal government will pass the Our London Family Act. We will appoint a standalone minister for anti-racism, and we will work across party lines to deliver real progress for you.
Sorry to cut you off, but we are now entering the face-to-face between yourself and Ms. Horvath, and you can begin.
Well, as I was just saying a second ago, I think it is so critically important to make sure that you do find creative ways to work across party lines. We saw some examples of that over the past 2 years. I will say that it was a missed opportunity that Mr. Ford and his team did not invite the opposition leaders into more discussions to play a constructive role. I think in my time as leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, there were 2 meetings that took place. I think we need to see more of that. I think about the climate crisis. Part of our plan is to make sure that if elected June 2nd, we will appoint a multi-party committee of cabinet on the climate crisis to make sure that we are prepared and to make sure that that issue, which truly must transcend partisanship, is actually dealt with in the most collaborative way. So bringing unity to the province, having a standalone anti-racism directorate or a minister responsible for the anti-racism directorate, and bringing people together is something that is core to Ontario Liberal values.
Thanks for the opportunity to respond to that a little bit. I spent a lot of time in the legislature when Mr. Del Duca's team was in office, and we tried very hard to get the Liberal government of the day to work with us to make bills better, but very rarely would we ever succeed in getting that level of collaboration. So it's great that Mr. Del Duca has seen the light as to how other parties can help make things better if they only, welcome the conversation. But we have some serious problems in this province when it comes to division. And we were able to successfully get the Liberals to put the anti-racism directorate in place, but Mr. Ford has defunded it for all intents and purposes. We need to be proactive. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce the hate, to reduce the violence, and to make sure that people know that they're valued here, that they're welcome here, that we will protect them when nobody should go into a masjid, their mosque, and have to look over their shoulder for fear that somebody's going to come in and start attacking people. Nobody should be worried. No woman should worry while she's walking down the street that somebody's going to tear her hijab off of her head. That's where things are at now, and in some ways, I think politicians have to be really, really careful about the role they play in fomenting hate and using dog whistle politics. It's really, really a problem. We should show that leadership.
Thank you, Ms. Horvath. Let Mr.
through our
Del Duca.
actions.
Yeah, if I can just say, it's actually worse than they defunded the anti-racism directorate, the Ford Conservatives. They actually took that responsibility and lumped it in with the minister responsible for Ontario's prisons, which is a horribly backward way to view dealing with the anti-racism directorate, in my estimation. I'll also say that when our national capital was under an illegal occupation, the second largest city in Ontario, it took Mr. Ford days before he spoke out against the divisive scenes that we all saw in this province when statues like the Terry Fox statue were being desecrated by anti-vaxxers. That's not the kind of leadership that brings Ontarians together.
Thank you very much. Mr. Schreiner and Mr. Ford, your turn. Mr. Schreiner, you can kick things off.
Two of the biggest challenges we face right now in Ontario is the rising levels of hate and white supremacy in this province. It's unacceptable, and we all have to be unified in speaking out against it. But we have to go further than words, and we have to turn them into actions. That's why I'm asking Mr. Ford, will you support the Our London Family Act? Will the next Parliament have 4 parties that will get behind an act to bring in action to combat Islamophobia? Will you admit that it was wrong to eliminate the anti-racism directorate, bring it back, and properly fund it so we have concrete action to combat rising levels of anti-Black racism, especially, and anti-Indigenous racism in our province? And when it comes to the climate crisis, will you stop dismantling climate action plans? Will you stop dismantling environmental protections that actually many of them brought in by previous Conservative governments? Will you actually restore the ability of independent science-based organizations in this province to protect people in the places we love, to adequately prepare us to be ready for the climate emergency that is bearing down on us right now?
Give him a chance to answer. Mr. Ford.
Well, Mr. Schreiner and my other two opponents here, make no mistake about it. We will not tolerate any racism of any kind in Ontario. Bottom line, full stop, you know it. We're actually putting millions of dollars of funding towards helping different communities in support to make sure outside of their mosque, they can have funds to have security there. But let me tell you something, Mr. Schreiner. There's a couple things we can agree on. You know, I'm not a big partisan guy. We get votes from the NDP, traditional NDP, Liberals, and PCs, and you're kind of the same. And what I like, at least Mr. Schreiner is honest and upfront. He says he's for higher taxes. He's for more regulations. And I just wish you'd rub off on your other two colleagues, because they're for higher taxes and they're for a lot of regulations. But you know something, what I did enjoy when we went to Medline in Guelph, we worked together, Mike. And you're that type of guy that you can put the political stripes behind you. We went out to Medline, a huge company out in Guelph. We cut the ribbon together. I can work with Mr. Schreiner, and I can work with all levels of government, all different political stripes. And I showed it to the country. And I have a great relationship with 12 other premiers, great relationship with the federal government, and a great relationship with 444 municipalities.
It's not about your relationship with other levels. But that's okay. That's your answer. And now Steve will take it.
Okay. And under the rubric of leadership here, I know there are people watching us right now, and I want to come at this from a fiscal point of view, because we've seen all your platforms, and you are all pledging to spend billions and billions more than what's coming into the Treasury in revenues in an extremely buoyant economic time. And my question, which I'm sure many people are wondering right now, is do any of you feel any obligation to be more prudent in your spending plans? Okay, 45 seconds each, then open debate. Andrea Horvath, you get to go first.
Thanks very much. I want to let the people of Ontario know that we will not raise taxes on middle-income and low-income families because we know that you're hurting. But what we will do is be responsible with the government's treasury and make sure that we're putting in place the things, fixing the things that are broken. That's the best way to say it. Fixing the things that are broken in this province, the things that matter most to you, like our healthcare system, like our long-term care system, like our education system, making sure people have good jobs that pay the bills. These are things that people need to know that a government is there for them to address. I stand with everyday people before elections, during elections, and after elections, and I will continue to do that.
Thanks, Ms. Horvath. Doug Ford, your turn now.
Well, unlike the other three parties, I'm a strong believer in putting money back into people's pockets until they can go out and spend it and stir up the economy. There's 550,000 more people paying taxes now than they were under the Liberals and NDP. We'd lost 300,000 jobs. We want more companies to come here. As I said earlier, when companies come here, everyone thrives and prospers. There's an opportunity to get a job in every single sector. I am a strong believer of getting better jobs and bigger paychecks, and that's what's happening right now. We're invested record amounts in infrastructure, $157 billion. We believe in building roads and building highways, building schools and hospitals to continue to make sure
Ford,
that
thank you.
Ontario
That's your
thrives.
time. Mike Schreiner, you're up next.
The COVID pandemic revealed the cracks in the foundation of Ontario, particularly our systems of care, and we can't simply pave over those cracks. We actually have to fix them. That's why we have to invest in people and expanding hospital capacity and putting people before profits in long-term care and making sure that our education system is shored up. And so I won't raise taxes on low and middle income folks. Yeah, I'm going to ask wealthier people in this province to pay a bit more so we can have the funds to fix the foundation. And so we can prepare for the next crisis, which is the climate crisis. I mean, people in Kenora are being evacuated right now due to flooding. We've having all these extreme weather events. We have to be ready for them.
Okay, Mr. Del Duca, you're up next.
Well, thanks very much. Look, I said earlier tonight that this election is about a choice. Governing is also about choosing. The Ontario Liberal plan that we put out a number of days ago is fully costed. You can see that we use the same fiscal anchors that the Financial Accountability Officer used, that the Auditor General validated. We anticipate being able to responsibly balance Ontario's books by 2026. But here's the important caveat. I will never cut and deliver chaos and havoc in public education, public health care, economic dignity and support for small businesses, elder care, and the fight against the climate crisis the way that Doug Ford has. So I believe in balance, moderation, and responsibility, but I will lead on those topics to make sure you have
Mr. Del Duca,
a
thank
province
you.
that is a place to grow.
I'm going to suggest the following question to kick off this 5-minute debate period, which is leadership also means leading on the most existential issue of our time, which is climate change. And Mr. Ford, why don't you start off this 5-minute period with, do you think you've done enough to fight climate change?
Well, right now we're at 94% clean energy, but I'm never happy until we hit 100%. But what we're doing, we're investing billions of dollars into jobs, long-term jobs that people will be able to have an income. We're changing lives in Windsor and in Oshawa and right across this province by attracting $14 billion of investment into electric vehicles. We have critical minerals up in the north, be it the graphite and the cobalt and the nickel that's going to build these batteries. It's going to come down through the supply chain into Hamilton in your own backyard that you fought against, changing over from coal plant to electric arc furnace.
You've made an allegation. Hang on.
Along with
He's made
Sault Ste. Marie, that's like taking 1 billion cars off the
stand
roads.
by. You've made an allegation against her. We have to let her respond to it. Go ahead.
Well, I think Mr. Ford just has a penchant for making stuff up again. That's what he does over and over and over. But this is the premier that basically had a tantrum and tore out EV charging stations when he first took office. He tore up green energy contracts when he took office. Now he's seen the light, perhaps. I somehow doubt it. But what I can say is that New Democrats have a very strong program. It's called the Green New Democratic Deal. We'll get emissions down by 50% by 2030. By 2050, we'll have a zero carbon economy, and we'll do it by making great jobs that help with retrofits, having the first youth climate corps ever in North America, engaging young people in not only tree planting, but in mitigation.
Okay, let me get Mr. Del Duca to have a chance on this one.
Okay.
Too.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, this is such a huge topic for current and future generations. I do have to say on the clean energy piece, because Mr. Ford made a claim just a second ago, because he and his team have no plan to deal with Ontario's clean energy needs over the next few years, we anticipate that he will see, or under his leadership, there will be a 600% increase in fossil fuel burning fuel to produce Ontario's electricity in the next number of years. This is what happens when you have leadership that doesn't have the capacity to lead. And can I just say, earlier in the debate tonight, when we were talking about leadership, Mr. Ford talked about how hard he's been working. There's just one thing that I do want to put out there. Over the past 2 years, what we have seen in terms of Mr. Ford's attendance at question period has been appalling. More than 82% of the time set aside for him to respond to the opposition parties, he's been absent. Now, if you're watching at home and you don't show up for work 82% of the time, I suspect you don't get promoted. In fact, you don't keep your job. Same thing if you're in school.
Okay,
and you don't show up 82% of the time.
We've got to be
Only
fair
Mr.
here.
Ford
We've got to be
wants
fair
to
here,
not
Mr.
show
Del
up
Duca.
and get rewarded.
We need to hear from Mr. Schreiner, and then Mr. Ford gets a chance to respond to that.
Thank you.
Let's be honest and let's be clear. The climate crisis is the biggest challenge we've ever faced. It's also a huge opportunity for Ontario to be a global leader in the new climate economy. But Mr. Ford, when he first came into office, dismantled all of Ontario's climate action plans. And then he started systematically dismantling environmental protections, many of them actually brought in by former Conservative governments, particularly Bill Davis. And he did it saying, oh, this is about cutting red tape. Well, I'm sorry. Protecting people from flooding is not red tape. Protecting the farmland that feeds us is not red tape. Mr. Ford's plans to ramp up gas plants will increase climate pollution by 300% in Ontario, undermining all the hard work we did on the coal phase out. He wants to build electric vehicles, but he doesn't want the average person to be able to afford them. Our plan will make electric vehicles, new and used, and e-bikes available for people because it costs you $2,000 less a year to fill it up.
Okay, Mr. Schreiner, we need to give Mr. Ford a chance to respond to some of the comments that were made. Go ahead, please.
Well, I appreciate the compliments from all three of them. Mr. Del Duca, first of all, I can't believe the gall. You were the one in your party sold one of our crown jewels. You sold Ontario Hydro. Hydro won.
82%.
You know something? You drove up hydro rates to the highest rates in North America.
I'd like to respond.
You drove out 300,000 jobs.
Yeah.
We're creating more jobs, put more money back into people's pockets. All three of you are about hiking up gas prices. Gas prices. People can barely fill their tanks right now.
You're going to
all three of you want to jack up the gas prices. I'm lowering the gas prices. I'm making sure that we're getting rid of the tolls that you put on.
We're in a climate emergency.
And we're going to make sure we aren't bringing back that license plate sticker.
Jumping in for a second here, because you made an allegation against Mr. Del Duca. Sure. He needs to respond.
Yeah, look, I just have to say, Mr. Ford seems to be the only person on the stage that doesn't realize he's been premier for the past 4 years, because he continues to try to fight the 2018 election all over again. We know in Ontario today, many of you watching at home tonight are struggling. You are concerned about what's happening to your kids, to your parents and grandparents, to our environment, whether or not you're going to be able to ever afford a home. And Mr. Ford keeps dishing out empty words and slogans. By the way, slogans that other people write for him, instead of sharing what's in his heart and his head. And this is after he's been in the job for 4 years. When you don't show up for work 82% of the time, you lose your job. And tonight, Mr. Ford,
Andrea,
you should lose yours on June 2nd, and you will lose yours
Andrea
on June 2nd.
Horvath, please. Last minute, Andrea.
I understand why you don't want to talk about the 2018 election, because you only retained 7 seats. And that's because you disappointed Ontarians. 15 years, and we had a sell-off of Hydro One. We had long-term care in an absolute mess. The gas plant sell-off. I mean, the gas plant scandal, rather.
5 seconds.
That's not leadership either, Mr. Del Duca.
Respectfully, Ms. Horvath.
That's not leadership either.
Respectfully, Ms. Horvath, every time you attack me, as you've done for a year, Doug Ford smiles. Progressives need real leadership.
Gotta go.
And that's what
Here's
we're
the thing,
offering.
friends, here we go. That's the end of the open debate here. We're going to try something a little different here before we go to closing statements, and that is, you've all had to make thousands of political decisions in your careers. I'd like to know which decision you regret the most. Mike Schreiner, you get to go first. 30 seconds here. Fire away.
Oh, my goodness. I would say probably the one I regret was that I did not run in Guelph. The first time I ran as leader. Even though it was a community I'd started a business in and had deep roots and a long-standing relationship with, I chose another riding to help out another one of our candidates. And that whole situation blew up in my face.
Thank you. Mr. Ford, decision you regret the most?
Well, it's probably similar to Mr. Schreiner's. I wish I would have run 4 years earlier. Then we wouldn't have to be dealing with all the mishaps that happened under the Liberal and NDP government. We'd be able to get so much further ahead, but right now, I would have to say that.
Mr. Del Duca.
You know, I think one of the things that's a challenge when you're serving in a government is that sometimes you don't always listen necessarily. I think this is true of every politician, every level of government. You don't always listen really closely, despite your best efforts, to what the people in your local community are telling you about whether they feel you're being responsive to their needs. It can be very easy to sort of fall into the trap of doing your best and not necessarily paying close attention. I think that was a really important lesson that I learned through 2018, which was not an easy year for me at a political or personal level. And that's something that stays with me as a lesson learned for going forward.
Thanks, Mr. Del Duca. Ms. Horvath.
Thanks, Steve. You know, my mom always taught me that if something goes wrong and you regret it, then you need to learn from it. You need to figure out why you regret it, why it didn't go the way that you want, and then do better. Learn from that mistake and do better. And I think a lot of parents told their kids that. And so I don't think about things in terms of regret. I think about things in terms of opportunity to learn and to do better for people the next time.
Thanks, leaders. Althea.
And now it's time for closing statements. And again, the order was decided by a draw. Ms. Horvath, we begin with you.
Thanks so much. It's been my pleasure to chat with folks tonight and to talk to the other leaders. And thank you both, Althea and Steve. This election has a lot at stake. And what we need to do to fulfill a lot of the opportunities that we talked about tonight, all of that starts with defeating Doug Ford's government. There's really only one shot at this point in time to do that, and that's with the NDP. So I'm asking people this time, come together under the NDP so we can defeat Doug Ford and start fixing the things that matter most to you.
Very much. Mr. Del Duca.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this clash of ideas, of the discussion about Ontario's future and where we go next. I said earlier tonight, I know that so many of you are struggling. I know that we are a strong and resilient people, and we will get through this together. But I want you to know I love this province. It's where I've spent my whole life. It's where my wife and I, of course, are raising our daughters. And I want you to know that as Premier, I will work relentlessly for students, for seniors, for economic dignity, for a clean environment, for small business, and for our future. We will be a place to grow.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ford.
Well, tonight you heard very different visions of the future of Ontario. You'll have a very clear choice on Election Day. You can vote for any three of these parties, but I'll tell you, they're going to jack up your taxes like you've never seen, like they did before, and they're going to make life a lot more expensive. Or you can vote for the PCs that have a vision and have a plan to continue with prosperity throughout this whole province. Folks, I'm asking for your vote on June the 2nd. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Schreiner.
We need a parliament that's going to meet the moment. We finally have a Green MPP at Queen's Park who's punched well above his weight over the last 4 years. And I need more Green MPPs from places like University Rosedale, Diane Sachs. By the way, Mr. Ford, you fired the wrong Environment Commissioner. I need people like Matt Richter in Parry Sound, Muskoka, because I wished I'd been there 4 years sooner. So we were more prepared for the crisis that's bearing down on us, the climate crisis.
Mr. Schreiner, thank you very much. That is our time. Thank you very much, candidates. Doug Ford, Andrea Horvath,
Appreciate it.
Stephen Del Duca, Mike Schreiner.
And a reminder, there are 10 days of advance polls starting May 19th, plus Election Day itself on June the 2nd. Go to the Elections Ontario website for more information on where and how to vote.
That's right. Please vote. And thanks, everybody, for watching, and good night.
Thanks, Andrea.
Good night, everybody.